This is the one thing that we can just split off into miniature videos or whatever.
Or it might be a long one.
That's true. It might end up being another episode. So we just
happen to wear the same things the following week.
Yeah, I just need to turn it inside out. It's always black on the outside and the inside. Just need to wear my hoodie underneath my t-shirt. Basically, creativity. What's the creative process from A to B when it comes to design? So you've had something in your brain, you've drawn it in a sketch on an iPad, like really rough outline, and you started to like materialize the idea from a thought to a 2D dimensional thing with black and white or with a bit of color. And then you want to like digitize it, which is basically creating that drawing or the sketch or the paper drawing or whatever into a designed version on Figma. As you're doing that, you realize it doesn't meet your own expectations of your brain because it wasn't how I thought it was going to be, which is fine. It's a case of just iterating. So I would say like the first thing is looking at examples of stuff that we've already done. So if you look at our current website and the way that that's laid out, the difference between where it is now and let's say that website version is there are things like typography sizing, right? So the fonts that are being used are a little bit more like visual, so it looks more intentional because it's like a theme. I'm trying to think of like if you saw a font, you kind of resemble it to a particular brand, right? Because sometimes fonts make you think a particular brand. So I'd be like using like headings, paragraph and stuff like with the correct fonts, straight away lift it. Then the second thing is like textures and shadows and stuff, lift it again. So for example, harsh colors and color blocks work from a wireframe kind of skeleton mode, but really the thing that makes something nice is sometimes the kind of like the subconscious like feeling or textures or layering or like kind of one thing on top of the other, or the fact that there's a background image and it's faded out. It's the composition, which is basically like A, B, and C together in a particular way makes it look nice rather than the fact that it's just A, right? It's the way that they all hang together and the positioning of A is over here, B is over here, and C is over here. So I'd be like, take what we've already designed.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The creative process in a very simplistic, like you're trying to teach a kid way, do you class it as A and B? And then you go back to A, go back to B, or you like A, B, C, D, or you like A1, A2, A3. So do you go, what I mean by that is, do you do sketch, A, design, B. You put the B back into A. So now that's A. How do you get to B to like the next stage? Or is it more you just darting all over the place, sort of scatterbrained? Or is there more of a quite succinct process? Because in a weird way, I'm quite logical and like process. But for some reason, when I come to design, I feel like I'm the most unprocessed version of myself, as if I'm more following my emotions rather than my logic. So it's like it feels new to me of exploring this style, which might be different. Both of us might have different ways, or it might be very similar, but you might have learned how to ride the waves of either the randomness or you've been able to formulate it.
It's a great question, and there's so many different ways. So I'll try and succinctly explain one particular way that works, right? And we'll frame it in the realm of web design. So
the only way to do this title.
Yeah, the ultimate way to design a website. Basically, there's some extra contexts. So from a website perspective, a lot of the time, the content drives the success of the page because of SEO, right? Search engine optimization. So typically what I would do is I would write a web page out in a Word document with the kind of different things you want to do. So whether or not, firstly, you're obviously going to do a title, then you're kind of going to do a subheading to that. And then you're probably going to come up with three things. So let's say if this is a website, let's take our product page. We have 3 products to kind of showcase. So the title of the page would be our products, and then you would have maybe a subline, maybe not, and then you'd have 3 kind of like boxes, And each of those would have a heading. And that heading would be like product A, right? So let's call them out like actually physically. So the first one would be like, one product is to-dos, right? Which is our dyslexia-friendly to-do app. So heading number 2 would be to-dos, and then it would be a paragraph like, this app helps anybody focus on tasks by visualizing one task at a time and providing quick solutions when you get stuck. You can break down a task, and you can also complete a task. So you can pass a task over, right? To say it's too hard, so it doesn't interrupt your flow. And the most important part is rewarding yourself. This app does all that stuff, right? So you do something like that, a couple of lines, real short, to the point. And then the next thing is it's going to be a button, right? It's going to be a button to be like, download now. And basically, there's going to be an image of the app. And then on the other 2 slides, it'll be exactly the same, but it'll be the reverse in the sense of like image on the left, text on the right. The second box will be text on the left, image on the right. Like you could do it like that. Or nowadays, I'm kind of like, basically people read down one line, and sometimes moving it over left, right is a bit, it's good from a design and visual perspective, but not if you're trying to just scan through to see what's interesting, right? Because it's easier to read all the headings when they're all aligned up in the same vertical way. So I'd be like, that's broadly speaking the layout of the page. So you know roughly where you're going to start. It's going to be like a block with a heading, and then 3 repeatable blocks with an image, a title, a blurb, and a button. So then you're like, okay, cool, let's start putting that together. Now for me, I don't necessarily have A, B, C. I have A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. Then I'm like, duplicate A5 and then call it B, and then do B1, B2. And then now you have 2 designs. So you like push one design really, really far, and then you duplicate it and try and like strip it back or change it, or like angle images, or maybe do it, left and right, rather than down the middle or something. You do like a slight iteration, and then you'd present 2, because typically it's better to say, which one do you prefer, A or B? Or do you like A? Yes or no? Like it's always a better conversation when you say, do you like A or B? So always provide people with options, because then there's the less kind of like downer. And typically what they say is, I like a bit of A and I like a bit of B. So then you go away and create C, which is a merge of A and B. Or you take A and just iterate A5 to be A6, which is inclusive of some of the ideas from B. So when you actually come down to the putting it together on the page, you've got your mental layout or your sketch, and you've got some of the rough copy and stuff, because what you're trying to do is eliminate some of the thinking processes to other disciplines. So then there's more clarity, and like, you know now exactly what you're doing. You don't need to think about headings, and you don't need to think about like overall structure. You now need to think about making that happen in a visually pleasing way. So you'd go to Dribbble. Dribbble is DIRBBB, triple B's LE.com, to get inspired about how do other people do like portfolio pages, and what have they done. And you'd look at those things, copy those images, paste it into your design. And a lot of the time, the treatment of a design might already exist. So for example, we already do our headings with a typical font. So we're going to use that font. That's a non-negotiable, right? Especially if you've got a brand that's existing. Now, if you, let's say we had no brand at all, you would basically get some heading, write it out, and you would flick through different fonts that you like. So you'd duplicate the same heading into different fonts, and you'd just be flicking through your fonts, or you'd go to Google Fonts to find something that you liked off the back of being inspired by looking at Dribbble. And maybe you like this, you know, if you think of like Daft Punk or like neon, like, what's that film? It's about neon driving. Iron is one word. Tron. That's it.
Tron.
Awesome. Yes. So Tron has this like technology, like dark blue neon lights, pink neon lights, has this style, right? And it has this very hard coded, like hard edges. So you would not have like soft edges on the font. The font would be a bit hard. It might be a bit stodgy, as in like short and fatter. And you'd find something like that to give you this feel. Then you drop that in, and then you'd start playing around with like a font would be like, a heading would be like heavier, the paragraph text would be slightly lighter and more readable. So that the heading would be stylized, and you start throwing those ideas together, and then you start putting the page together. Another thing is like buttons. A button is a really good place to start with styles, because that can dictate how it's going to be. So it'll start with the accent color. So is the site going to be, orange, or is it going to be red, or like some accent color? So again, you go and search in Dribbble and search for like green related, because you can pick a color to get it to show you web pages that have green in it, for example. So the button has a few things. It has a shadow ability. It has rounded corners or not rounded corners. It has big paddings or little paddings. It has long buttons. So a button is a really good place to do some style, because that is like a place where there's lots of variables to play with. So I would do like the buttons and headings kind of feel, and then just start throwing it together. You would then use things like Unsplash for photography, free photography, or you would go, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's some free illustrations that you can download, and you can just change the accent color in the illustration. So you start dropping those in. And then really it's a case of, well, you've already from your Google Doc, you've got rough layout. You've come up with your typography, what works well, either from a brand guideline, or you basically going to look at Dribbble and basically copy some of the things that you like out of it. And you're not copying it like for like. You're taking image A, taking image B, and kind of like collating it together. So it itself is a unique creation of an amalgamation of stuff. And then I'd be like, you add textures and layers if it is that kind of thing. So for example, when we did the Penelope website, you saw the first version, right? It was very like white and pale, with just like the green accent color everywhere. And we duplicated it and just put textures and colors. So like, soft pastel colors. There's a website called Subtle Patterns, which helps create repeatable background images that repeat with no like, oh, there's a glitch in where like the edge meets the other edge because it's not meeting properly to create a pattern. So that has patterns like a flooring pattern, a wood pattern, a tile pattern, sometimes just like a noise pattern, like a static pattern that you can add. So then that basically creates, rather than it being like a harsh web pages of just color and text and boxes, you then create this softness and a feeling of like you could feel it, right? Textures and stuff. Now, thematically, from a trend perspective, we used to like things that looked as if we could physically touch it with a lot of shadow and kind of like depth and stuff. But we've moved away from that to this like flat design, which is cool. But there's a phrase called perceived affordance. Now, the reason why that a handle of a door is like, which way to use it because of the way that the shadow is, right? Because if it was flat, you would think it's a push door. But if it was like protruding out, as in like you would see it physically protruding out with a shadow, it's a pull door. Now, if there's no like depth,
unless it's those buildings that have got those pull doors, but really it's a push.
Oh yeah, like the flappy door that goes both ways. Yeah. So you want
not even that, just a bad design.
Yeah, you want to add some hint to what it actually does, and in adding the hint, that basically means there's less interpretation. Is the door push or is the door pull? Similar with those bars, sometimes you don't know if the bar is a push or a bar is a pull. Now, if you see a bar, typically you think it's a pull, but a lot of the time it's not, it's a push. So they have the sign that says push. Like you want to avoid the need to think about stuff. And that's how buttons are not always like just white on white with black text. They've got some like framing, they might have a shadow, and then when you hover over it might have an interaction. So all this stuff is like this flat design thing of you just iterating, and you're coming up with ideas. You might add a background image and turn the opacity to 10 and have a background image on with then a purple overlay and like have this layering stuff. So I would say it's all about like layering and giving that feel, because if you looked at our website like Ryland.Wales and you looked at the blocks, if they did not have that like pattern texture on the background, some do and some don't. If it didn't, it would look really bland. So in adding just that pattern, it's really subtle, just gives it like it's been thought out a little bit more. But of course, I also agree that everything shouldn't feel too intense. It's about, having things with breathing space and not too messy, because we're trying to add in a bunch of ideas and stuff.
So when you go in with an idea, do you go in more with the vision of the idea, or how you would feel, let's say, being on a website, how you want to feel? So you're fleshing out the feeling, or you're fleshing out the visual, like what you see. Does that make sense? Or a bit of both?
Yeah, it is a bit of both, but I particularly am more like a feeling. So, for example, when you first look at a website or you first look at a logo, there's this test that you can do, which is like a 5-second test, right? You see this thing, and then you make it disappear, and you say, "Hey, so what did you think?" Kind of thing. And usually it does two things. One, is it memorable? And two, like, one, is it memorable enough for you to, like, for me, I'm like, can you draw it in the sand, right? Is it memorable enough from a logo perspective to redraw this thing right now, right? Or to kind of like remember what it kind of looked like or not? But the second thing is like, if it is a web page, like, what was the feeling? Was it like, did it look professional? Did it look like childish? Would you want to like entrust something to them? So let's say you're a cybersecurity firm. Looking at their website, if their website is a little bit like playful, you probably don't want to trust them with your thing. So there's always that like feeling that some design makes you feel. And it's about the trust aspect of it. And then it's the like, do you understand what it does? Because design isn't about just design for design's sake. Do you understand what this is? So for example, like a product page, do you know what this product actually does? And you might be like, no, not really. There's a bunch of nice things and there's animations and stuff, but I don't really understand it. So that's why the Google Doc is like a good starting place for just like broad layout. But then you would write the text in, because really the text needs to be done independently of a design to some extent, so you can focus on like getting the text right. And usually what I'm saying is like, the less text, the better. And the more absolute, like descriptive, to the point you can make it is better. Like I read something recently that was like, we use AI technology and analytics to enhance performance or whatever. I'm like, that's cool for buzzwords' sake, and there is a place for buzzwords, but like, what does that mean? Like, in what way are you using AI? Like, what's that doing? Like, it's better to be like, we use AI technology to give you workout recommendations based on your success in your previous workouts, or something more like tangible, rather than just like flamboyant wording, because it's just buzzwords and you're like, oh, it uses AI, or it uses Web3, or it uses blockchain, therefore I must use it, you know? So I would say it's broadly that, but yeah, it is a feeling, because if you think about it, you go on certain websites and it'll make you feel something. You either trust it or you don't trust it, or you want to buy it or you don't want to buy it, or you want to come back to it or you don't want to come back to it. So I would say it's always that thing. So it's always good to like step back and be like, does now everything that I'm putting together like feel right? Like, would I want to buy from these guys? Would I want to work with these guys? So there's always that feeling. But ultimately, it does come down to my opinion. It's my opinion of all this stuff initially. Until then, you start showing it to other people and start tweaking things, because a lot of the time you'll think something and that's not actually the reality.
So going back to your opinion, it's a good segue into the next question I was going to ask. You've got an idea or you've got a feeling, you put it down to paper. It is not turned out how you either visualized it or felt like it was going to be. How do you not take it personal to then edit that idea, if that makes sense? So that you're not committed to, but I so visualized it this way, I don't want it to change. How do you be in a more fluid river style rather than a lake style that you're just stagnant and you're just committed to the idea, even if it might be a bad idea in the first iteration?
Yeah, to me, it's about like effort, right? Investment of effort. So I never delete anything, because that thing that didn't quite feel right might inspire something better to get closer to the thing that you did visualize. So I'd be like, just focus on, continual like effort in something until you do feel good about it, right? To a degree. Now, you need to validate that, as in, are you like, I know that there's a balance of like, this didn't look like how I thought about it. Sometimes that's okay, right? Because the end product that you did do is still good of a standard. So if it's that case, then I would definitely ask, get somebody else's opinion that you trust, and like you kind of like have a good relationship with them, because you don't want them to come in to be like, that's rubbish. You bring someone in to kind of like validate, cool, it's not what I thought it was going to be, but is this like good, to get some input to then refine it. So that'd be one way, if it's okay that what you thought didn't come out, But I would also say that for me, I can't always think about how it will look to start with anyway. So I'm just starting and putting something together until what I have in front of me feels right and looks good, So I would say that it is a case of like, just keep going, like just put in effort to like get to a place by experimenting and like figure yourself out. Cool, this design didn't get there. Critically analyze why that's the case. What's the feeling? Is it the colors? Okay, let's duplicate it and change the colors. No, it's not the colors. Is it the fonts? No, it's not the colors.
So do you have like a filter for when you're hitting, let's say, a dead end? Because it sounds like you keep some stuff that haven't worked out that might work in the future. So what is your dead end monitor? Is it the amount of effort, hours, maybe just it needs a lot of time and you don't have it right now? How do you sort of filter out to push the ideas in the season that you're in, and where to put the others on the shelf in the archives or whatever for potentially another day, or maybe never?
Yeah, it's like the gym, right? You never do 30 bench presses straight after another. You'll do 3 sets of 10. Like, you're always going to have a little break. So I personally would be like, it's not always good to sit there and put in effort until it corrects itself. What you want to do is like get to a certain stopping point where, okay, it's materialized enough to be able to kind of like have a sense of whether or not this is good or bad. And if you don't like it at that point, you can be like, cool, I'll put in another couple of hours and see where I get to, like just put in a few more. Or you'd be like, right, take a break. So it's always a sense of that feeling. Like, there's no harm in taking a break, because you'll never, like, creativity doesn't disappear. Like, you don't then become not creative. It's just like the outworking of it might be a bit harder, but you can just push through it or something. So it's not like, it's not as if like, if you go away, that skill will disappear. Do you know what I mean? So it's not, I have to stay here, otherwise I'll lose the kind of the positive effort that I've built up in those last 5 hours. I think the other trouble is like, if it's billable or not. If it's billable, I think it's very difficult, because there's the pressure of, you've charged X amount for this. So if you go over, more so if you go over, then no business is going to survive if you like quote something and then you are typically always going over, right? So it's a case of, if it's in that case, then try and take more regular breaks and try and get input from other people to get it right, rather than like, I'm going to sit here and like basically utilize all of the time. I'm also fine with going over budgets on certain things, because you want it to be right rather than on it like in budget kind of thing, right? Because the end goal is more important. So, like, because a lot of the time, some will be over, some will be over, some will be under. So overall, it works out, So yeah, if there's a time thing, then more breaks and more kind of like holding it lightly. If there's no time break, then like explore your kind of like blockers. Like, ask yourself questions like, why don't I like this? Go back to dribble, look at stuff, and like, you'll spot the stuff that you do like, and then just pick them all out and be like, what's the pattern here? What's the pattern between these 3 images? Why do I like these 3 images, but I don't like my design? It's because these 3 images use like purple instead of, green or whatever. So maybe I should switch it. And you're just trying and testing stuff until it feels right. But again, there is a moment where you're like, I'm not quite happy with it. I've iterated. I'm still not quite happy with it. I should probably take a break. So it's like a repeat disappointment or a repeat frustration is probably a good time just to step away, go and look at something be inspired by something absolutely different. Like go and look at a cityscape, go and look at some plants, go and open a comic book, go and watch something, go and cook something. Like just do something to switch lanes, and then come back, and then you might be like, what you look at is like, oh, actually I do quite like this, and you can like recap, okay, from the stuff that I stopped with, well, actually this does look okay, let's bring this back in, so it's not a definitive like process, but I'm like, if you feel frustrated, then spend a little bit extra time, aka an hour or 2 hours, and you still feel frustrated, take a break. But sometimes, like, if you feel frustrated in the first time, take a break. So it's that kind of feeling. So just like understand the frustration that you feel, the logic behind the frustration. Why do you feel frustrated? Oh, logically it's because we're using purple and not green, or I'm using this font over this font. And you figure those things out by like looking at stuff you do like and comparing. So compare more and utilize other inspirations. Like, why do you like that, Nike app? Well, it's because they're using everything is black and white text. So maybe you should just duplicate it and do black and white text. Maybe that will feel better, like feel more kind of like I'm happy with it, rather than the white background and black text that you had, I would also say one final bit is like, usually
got to end on high now. Now you said that final bit.
Well,
drum roll, please.
It's more the final bit of this answer. Another thing is like typically in web, you don't necessarily use black as an actual color. You'll use like an off black. So like 111 from a hex perspective. So there's like a softer edge to it. And another thing that's quite nice is if you designed a website and basically you have a color, like I always use green because that's my vibe, right? You could have a tint of green in every color that you have on the page, which unifies the idea. So your black might be actually a very, very dark green. And also your kind of like your colors on the page might have like a 2% tint of green, which then unifies this like visual treatment to be a cohesive one thing rather than like it's a bit like all over the place. So that's another like little trick that people can do as well.
That's good. Any final pointer?
Creativity is a muscle. If you do not exercise that muscle, you will never get better. But also, what's better? Ultimately, it's the fact that you are able to just do weights in a consistent manner. Maybe some days you can lift more. Maybe some days you can lift less. But ultimately, it's, overall, like a stock market, it's getting better. There are moments where you hit brick walls because...
Unless you're listening to this in a recession.
Well, even in a recession, if you look at the stock market and the fact that the stock market went down in COVID, it's now back up again. And overall, if you look at like the 5-year mark, it's overall the trajectory is kind of gone in a vertical line going from like diagonally up. I'm trying to explain it in a visual way because I'm using my hands a lot. So
for all those listeners,
it's
like this.
From the bottom left-hand corner to the top right-hand corner, draw that line. That's what it's doing. So I think like, don't be hard on yourself, and like, you just got to keep at it. And like a lot of the time, creativity is not necessarily coming up with something from scratch. It's going to look at inspirations and pulling those things together. One really great thing for like logos is about really icons, right? And an icon, the M of McDonald's, that's literally like an icon, right? You could draw that in the sand. So when it comes to logos, one great thing is like take the letter of a company. So for example, Ryland. In Google, type in R logos, and it'll come up with a bunch of R letter logos. Then you look through the ones you like or dislike, and then just rebuild it and color it pink instead of blue. It doesn't have to be that you sit there and draw 20 unique ideas. Of course, other people would say your first 20 ideas are rubbish. It's the 21st idea, which is where the magic dust happens. But I'm not really like that because I don't have the money to be able to draw 20 ideas, as in I don't have the time and money to always do that. So sometimes you have to be a bit cleverer and kind of like actually the first couple of ideas are okay and you can change it later, especially with your own brand. Like your first logo, if you look at McDonald's logos, Ford logos, Apple logos, they are definitely not the same logos now that they were ages ago, that they've iterated and changed. So it's okay to do that, because we're always trying to simplify. And if you look at them, they've gone from complexity to simplicity, because we're much more kind of icon image based people. That's why if you look at the Ryland Consulting logo, it's an R with like scaffolding and connecting of ideas, because I wanted it to be this idea of like, like if you were looking at a map with a bunch of string, like tying dots to dots and stuff, it's that kind of idea. It's the connection of people, it's the connection of ideas, it's the connection of structure to ultimately build this now thing that you actually understand, which is this letter R. And I really like the conceptual idea behind it. But really, it's because I saw an R that looked very, very similar. And I was like, that's cool. I like the idea. And I can come up with an explanation behind it. And then I like repurpose it to fit what I want it to fit.
Perfect. It's a good way to end.
Yeah, that is creativity 101.